This is Matthew Cratter from Trader University, and today I want to talk about Ethereum and its move to proof of stake and how this is going to enable large Wall Street firms like BlackRock to take over and control the protocol more than they already do. Now, BlackRock is a multinational investment company based in the US, and they currently have more than $10 trillion worth of assets under management. It's well known that they're in bed with the Federal Reserve. I made this video last year. It turned out to be my most popular video of all time, called The Great Reset and Your House, in which I talked about how BlackRock was basically borrowing money from the Fed and using it to buy up single-family homes, in the process making single-family homes much less affordable in the US and just completely taking down the inventory. The way they're able to do this is they borrow at very low rates from the Fed, and then they can basically capture the spread from the rental yield. And so I'll link to these articles below. BlackRock was also in bed with the Fed, helping to stabilize the markets back in early 2020, and that's sort of a euphemism for the Fed giving BlackRock money and allowing it to buy up corporate bonds and mortgage-backed securities and treasuries for the Fed. In the process, because BlackRock and the Fed are so corrupt, BlackRock was actually able to buy some of its own funds, some of its own ETFs and bond mutual funds in the process. So this is the kind of thing we're always seeing on Wall Street and with the Fed, this sort of self-dealing. If you're finding this video helpful so far, please hit that subscribe and like button. Maybe share this video with a few friends as well. So just to give you a little bit more of a flavor of BlackRock, if you don't hate them already, you're definitely going to hate them after you hear about how the BlackRock, one of the presidents and founders, called the current younger generations entitled generations and told them to put on their seatbelts and deal with the inflation. This was Robert Capito who said this, born in 1957, part of a very fortunate generation. He is currently has a net worth of close to $500 million, at least according to the internet. I think it's a pretty bad look for a guy who rides around in a private jet to tell middle and working class people to get ready to tighten their belts because of inflation, especially when he helped to found and he works for a company that actually hires central bankers who have helped to cause that inflation. BlackRock is famous for hiring Stanley Fischer, who used to be the vice chair at the Fed. So this is the problem. We have this revolving door between central banks and regulators and investment firms. And I hope this first part of the video has convinced you that BlackRock is a bad group of people, if you didn't already realize that. So now the question is, what does this have to do with Ethereum? Ethereum is changing consensus mechanisms, maybe sometime this year. They've been promising it for like 5 or 6 years. Maybe they'll actually be able to do it this year. So they're going to be moving from something called proof of work, which is what Bitcoin runs on, and Ethereum will be moving from this proof of work to proof of stake. Now, proof of work in Bitcoin, basically you have the miners, they burn electricity, and they try to use their machines to guess the magic number. This gives them the right to mine the next block and to capture the miner block reward, which is currently 6.25 Bitcoin plus transaction fees. So this looks weird and wasteful to the outsider. You have all these machines trying to guess a number. The problem is we can't compare proof of work to a rainbow and unicorn system. We have to compare it to the real world. Dropping bombs on women and children in Iraq and Libya to help us preserve US dollar hegemony over the last 10, 15 years might also be viewed as weird and wasteful to the outsider. You have to remember that dropping bombs is not good for the atmosphere and its carbon and methane content. So Ethereum currently uses proof of work, but it's moving to proof of stake. I'll link this MIT article if you want to read more about proof of stake. But the way it works basically is instead of miners, you have what are called validators who get to mine or validate or pick the next block and package up transactions in it. And the way it works is very similar to the way Washington, D.C. and the current financial system work. Whoever has the most coins wields the most influence. This is the big problem with proof of stake. Whoever's the richest has the most control, which sounds a lot like the current system, doesn't it? So the way it's going to work is you put up 32 ETH, which at current prices, with ETH at about $3,000 per coin, is about $96,000 to become a validator. So it's already a fairly high barrier to entry for just the regular American family. If you own 1% of ETH or 5% of ETH, whatever amount it is, you will get picked to validate or mine 1% or 5% of the new blocks. So it's a way of, if you have a lot of money, you can buy ETH and you can sort of lock in this control forever, as we're going to see. And this also looks a little bit like a bond, where you put up money, you put up cash, you put up principal, and then you earn some yield, in this case from the Ethereum block rewards, if you're an Ethereum validator. Now in Wall Street, we have something called the carry trade. This is used by Wall Street firms. It's used by hedge funds, etc. And basically it goes like this. You borrow at a very low rate, you invest at a higher rate, and then you pocket the difference. Often you'll use leverage as well to boost these returns. This is what banks do as well when they pay you 1% in your savings account and then lend it out as a mortgage to someone else at a higher interest rate. So classic carry trade, maybe you borrow at 2%, you invest those borrowed funds at 6%, and you pocket the 4% difference. And maybe you use some leverage, you lever it up 10x, and then you're making 40% a year. So a tremendous amount of the work, quote unquote work, that gets done on Wall Street and institutional investment is basically just putting on these carry trades. And this is sort of a blueprint, or at least it was historically a blueprint for starting a hedge fund and making money. You just put on carry trades, and if you blow up, you lose your investors' money, but hopefully you've made some money in the meantime. It's a fairly cynical way of doing things. And banks do it, investment firms do it. Obviously, Lehman Brothers and Bear Stearns and Wells Fargo and Goldman Sachs and all these companies were doing it. And then the great financial crisis came along and they blew up. And of course, they got a government bailout. Government let them get too big, so the government can bail them out whenever they are losing money. But when they're making money, you privatize the profits, you socialize the losses, as they say. So this is the carry trade. You borrow low and then you lend out higher. Large institutions like BlackRock and Goldman Sachs, etc., sit the closest to the Fed and the money printer. As we've seen, BlackRock is really the right hand, the right arm of the Fed. And as such, and because of the Cantillon effect, because they stand so close to the money printer, they can borrow at interest rates that you and I could only dream of. They borrow just a few basis points above wherever Fed funds or the risk-free rate is. And this is exactly how they got all that capital to buy up all those single-family homes like we were talking about at the beginning of the video. And that of course, was another carry trade where maybe they borrowed at 1% and then they earned a rental yield of 6 or 7%, and they got to pocket that spread between the rental yield and the cost of their capital. But the big point of this is that large Wall Street institutions can borrow at much lower rates than anyone else. And they have all these special privileges. They're basically in bed with the Fed. So once Ethereum moves to proof of stake, it's going to be possible for BlackRock and other firms to borrow as much money as they can from the Fed and then to buy up as much ETH as possible to put on this carry trade. So they'll borrow from the Fed at 1 or 2%, wherever Fed funds plus is. They'll buy ETH, become a validator, and then earn 6% or whatever it is. And they'll basically borrow enough money at rates that make this profitable. So if the yield being an Ethereum validator 6%, you'd be willing to borrow up to 6%, and you could still make money on the carry trade. So as such, BlackRock, Vanguard, Citadel, large Wall Street firms, Goldman Sachs, are going to become major holders of ETH. Coinbase and other exchanges are already very large holders of ETH. They will have a huge influence on the protocol as well, to the extent that people buy Ethereum, buy ETH, and leave it on the exchanges. These large financial institutions, which as we've seen are in bed with the Fed, are going to wield enormous control over the protocol, because they will be the miners / validators. They can conspire to veto certain blocks or transactions that they don't like. If they don't like your politics and they know who you are and which transaction you're trying to put through, they may choose to not even include, or to never include, your transaction in a block. In addition, BlackRock and others who become Ethereum validators can be pressured and coerced by the Fed to do things to Ethereum, since they owe the Fed money. They are beholden to the Fed. So moving to proof of stake virtually guarantees that existing financial interests and those who can borrow at the lowest rates, which again are not retail investors, they're large institutional investors, can borrow at these much lower rates, guarantees that these groups, these Wall Street groups, will control Ethereum. In which case, what's the whole point of the whole crypto and Bitcoin revolution? We've known for a long time, really since its inception, that Ethereum is not neutral money. The move to proof of stake basically guarantees that it can never morph into neutral money. And this was already made difficult by the bad start that it had, this huge pre-mine and pre-sale, something like 70%, controlled by insiders and whales. And all of these groups and oligarchs are, of course, in favor of moving to proof of stake because they become, not only did they benefit from the huge pre-mine, but now they can use proof of stake to increase their control. So I always hear this when I criticize Ethereum for proof of stake. Doesn't owning a lot of Bitcoin give you control over Bitcoin? Absolutely not. If it did, the New York Agreement back in 2017 would never have failed. This is where a lot of big companies, something like 70 or 80% of the Bitcoin miners, and then big companies like Coinbase and Grayscale, Barry Selbert, all these people, we can never forget what they tried to do to Bitcoin. If they had if owning more coins, owning more Bitcoin had given you more power, gives you more power over the protocol, these guys would have won the SegWit 2x, the block size wars. But in fact, they were defeated. So I'll link to this. You can read more about this. Was called the New York Agreement, where basically the Bitcoin miners and the large Bitcoin mining machine companies and the large corporations in the space tried to team up and force through this change. It's called SegWit 2x that was intended to increase the block size. And they were basically defeated by the full nodes. And so we learned that it really is the full nodes, which are very different from Bitcoin miners. Full nodes, it's very easy to spin up a full node. You just download the free software and run it. They actually provide the consensus, enforce the consensus rules. The Bitcoin miners, they mine blocks, but if those blocks or transactions violate any of the rules of the protocol, those blocks will be censored by the full nodes. And so this is really the answer to, does owning a lot of Bitcoin give you more control over Bitcoin? If it did, the New York Agreement would not have failed, and we would have had this SegWit 2x hard fork. Likewise, owning a lot of Bitcoin miners, mining machines, or ASICs, does not give you control over the protocol. We had all these Bitcoin miners in China, and still China wasn't able to control Bitcoin. They actually ended up kicking all of them out. Even if you own 51% of the hash rate, if you own enough miners, mining machines to be able to control 51% of the hash rate, and you do a 51% attack, nodes will reject your blocks. They'll route around you, and they'll especially reject your blocks if you try to do a double spending attack. And ultimately, the nodes may get together and decide to just brick your machines by changing the mining algorithm. And these ASICs are designed to only do one thing. They can only run SHA-256 and proof of work. If Bitcoin were to change the algorithm, these machines would be completely worthless, and all that capital would have gone down the drain. So all the incentives work against doing a 51% attack. In addition, in contrast to proof of stake, Bitcoin mining is an extremely competitive activity. Large Bitcoin miners from 4 years ago are no longer around. You can be a really large miner in the space or a large mining pool, and you can make the wrong decisions. You can fall behind and fall out of the top 10 or the top 100 and basically disappear from the mining scene. Under proof of stake, though, the same validators will be around forever because it's not competitive. You just sit there on your money bags and you get richer. I'm fine with the rich getting richer, but I don't like to see the rich getting richer without innovating. And this is what the current financial system does. Companies like BlackRock do. They allow the rich to get richer without innovating, not by creating a new iPhone or a new electric vehicle or something like this. But proof of stake and the current financial system, basically you just sit on your money, and if you're close to the money printer, you get paid and you get richer. It's very easy for the Fed to print up new money and give it to banks and investment firms like BlackRock to use to become Ethereum validators under proof of stake. But the one thing the Fed cannot print up, which is why proof of work is a much more fair system, the Fed cannot print up new energy, which is what Bitcoin's proof of work runs on. Energy is globally distributed, especially wind and solar. Even fossil fuels are fairly distributed as well. You have them in the Middle East, you have them in the US, you have them in Russia as well. By contrast, fiat money printers, unlike energy, are not globally distributed. They're basically concentrated at the Fed in New York, and to a lesser extent in London with the Bank of England, in Frankfurt with the ECB, the European Central Bank, and in Beijing with the People's Bank of China. Again, central bankers can always print up new money and use it to fund new Ethereum validators and control the protocol in that way, but the Fed cannot print up new money, and it's very difficult to become a Bitcoin miner and stay in the space for multiple years. Now, of course, the proof of this move, Ethereum's move to proof of stake, is being marketed using ESG concerns. But I think it's important to realize that ESG is mostly all about control. It's not about truly caring what happens to the Earth's atmosphere, the Earth's air and water. And if you have to be cynical about these things. You know what Wall Street's like. You know what investment bankers and central bankers are like. Do you really think that they love the environment all of a sudden? Did these people suddenly become nice guys? Are they actually ready to ditch their private jets? I think the answer to all of these things is no. If you have concerns, environmental concerns about Bitcoin, I'd encourage you to watch this video, which I'll link to below, which demonstrates how Bitcoin is actually good for the environment, as well as this video about Bitcoin and the electricity police. If you want to learn more about Ethereum's ties to Wall Street, especially to JP Morgan, and how Ethereum really is banker coin even before the move to proof of stake, I'd encourage you to check out this video as well, which I will link to below. If you found this video helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe and like button. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.